On the heels of the Munich Security Conference, top US and Russian officials prepare to hold talks in Saudi Arabia. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu, and this is The Heat. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio arrived in Riyadh on Monday in anticipation of high-level talks with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. The U.S. and Russian delegations are expected to meet on Tuesday to discuss improving ties between the two countries and negotiating an end to the Russia-Ukraine conflict. The meeting will mark a significant shift in ties following the U.S. diplomatic isolation of Russia after it began its operations in Ukraine nearly 3 years ago.
When Presidents Putin and Trump spoke on the phone, they agreed on the need to put behind an absolutely abnormal period in the relations between the two great powers, when they in fact did not communicate except on certain technical and humanitarian issues. And the presidents agreed that dialogue should be resumed.
On Sunday, U.S. President Trump said Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky would be involved in talks, but did not elaborate further. Zelensky says Kyiv should be involved in any discussions about its future. Well, for more on the Russia-Ukraine conflict, let's bring in our panel. Joining us from Germany is Ulrich Bruckner. He's a Jean Monnet Professor of European Studies at Stanford University in Berlin. Also with us from Virginia, Michael Maloof is a former senior security policy analyst with the Office of the U.S. Secretary of Defense. From Kyiv, we're joined by Oleksii Riabchyn. He is an advisor to the Deputy Prime Minister for European and Euro-Atlantic integration of Ukraine. And Dmitry Babich is a journalist and Russian political analyst. He joins us from Moscow. Thank you, everyone, for being with us. Dmitry, as I said, there are top officials from the United States, including the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, in Saudi Arabia for talks with the Russians, the Russian delegation led by Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. Now, these talks follow separate telephone calls that President Trump held with President Putin of Russia, as well as President Zelensky of Ukraine. Here is what Marco Rubio, the new United States Secretary of State, had to say on the eve of these talks. Let's listen.
We stand ready to follow the president's lead on this and begin to explore ways, if those opportunities present itself, to begin a process towards peace. Now, a process towards peace is not a one-meeting thing. This war has been going on for a while. Right. It's difficult. It's complicated. It's been bloody. It's been costly. So it will not be easy to end a conflict like this. And there are other parties at stake that have opinions on this as well. The European Union has sanctions as well. The Ukrainians are obviously fighting this war. It's their country, and they're on the front lines. So one meeting isn't going to solve it, but I want to reiterate, the president made clear he wants to end this war, and if opportunities present themselves to further that, we're going to take them.
So, Dmitry, what are expectations in Moscow as these talks get off the ground?
Well, everyone understands that first is going to be negotiation about negotiations. So they will agree on some timetable, and probably they will agree on a summit meeting of the presidents. But the mood is optimistic because what's going on is a terrible tragedy and a very risky situation for all of Europe and for all of the world. Because, you know, when cities have been struck by cruise missiles on both sides, the retaliation can be, you know, unpredictable. So the mood is optimistic. We hope there will be peace. And what surprises people here is that people who call themselves pacifists, you know, the Europeans, the European Union, which claimed that it was born under the star of Venus and not under the star of Mars as the Americans, these people say that we don't want cessation of hostilities, we want the war to continue, and we want Ukraine to win by all means. So Europe was unmasked. That was a surprise for many in Russia.
Dmitry, last June, President Putin said that Russia will not relinquish any of the territory that it's occupied in Ukraine. It also wanted an undertaking that Ukraine will not join NATO, and it also wanted Western sanctions to be lifted. Presumably, these things are now going to be on the negotiating table.
Well, the sanctions is the smallest priority for Russia because actually we survived and In some way, sanctions even helped certain sectors of our economy. The economy is doing pretty well now. But the other issues are indeed of crucial importance. If Ukraine is not neutral, it will be a threat to Russia. We have been trying to make it clear for many years. As for the territories, I hope bloodshed will stop, and I hope discrimination will not be, repeated on both sides. And these territories, if you look at the map, they are needed for security of Crimea. Donbass earned its right to be with Russia by blood. They continuously resisted the Ukrainian government for 8 years before the big war started. Okay. And Kherson and Zaporozhye are needed to connect Crimea to the mainland Russia, to make that peninsula secure. And even if you look at the American press and European press, these regions of Ukraine have always been populated mostly by Russian speakers. Okay. So for Russians, these are really important things. Sanctions are not that important.
Yeah, let's get the view from Kiev right now. Oleksii, Riabchyn, thanks for joining us. Ukraine is not at these talks that are taking place in Saudi Arabia right now. President Zelensky was very clear. He was unequivocal about these talks. He said Ukraine will not recognize any agreements that excludes the country. Let's listen to some of what he had to say.
Ukraine will not take part in the talks in Saudi Arabia. Ukraine didn't know anything about them. Ukraine regards any negotiations on Ukraine without Ukraine as ones that have no result, and we cannot recognize any things, any agreements about us made without us, and we will not recognize such agreements.
Now, Oleksii, President Trump has said that Ukraine will have a place at the table, but looking at what's going on right now in Saudi Arabia, what's Ukraine's view on this?
Hello, I can only confirm what my president is saying, that speaking about Ukraine without Ukraine is unacceptable. And I just returned from a Munich Security Conference, and our delegation had a very productive meeting with the Vice President Vance, with Secretary Rubio, and with a lot of teams that are negotiating on Ukraine. And I appreciate the efforts of President Trump, who publicly said that took a very strong obligation to end this war, and Ukraine, the most of the world, we would like to have peace, long-standing peace, not the one that will last for, I don't know, like a month or 2 or 4 years. No, we definitely would like to have a peace, and this is why we're speaking. Like, we already had our negotiations with the American delegation on a highest possible level, because our President Zelensky met with Trump several times and had a conversation over the phone. So like we know, and like the President Trump, who is the decision maker, knows exactly what are the conditions from the Ukrainian side. And also, like in the Munich Security Conference, we were discussing with the representative of the Trump administration, who are allocated to lead these negotiations, that they are about to prepare all of the possible options for the President Trump, not excluding anything, including joining Ukraine, NATO, American troops on the ground, or like many other like possible options. Mm-hmm. And these options will be on the Trump's table before he will take the decision. So we are confident in our position. Mm-hmm. And just to reply that, like, I'm a person born in Donetsk, born in Mariupol, used to live all my life in Donetsk, being previously a Russian speaker, but like I never ever we need to join Russia. So like the statement is false. Crimea, Zaporizhzhia, Donetsk is the Ukraine and always will be.
Ulrich, Bruckner, thanks so much for being with us. Thanks for your time. All of this, of course, puts the Europeans in a bit of a quandary right now on how to respond to what is going on. In fact, the Financial Times had a report in which it said that European leaders are in something of a scramble on how to respond to President Trump's initiative. French President Emmanuel Macron has called an emergency meeting of European leaders. That's going to take place in Paris on Monday. But we've also heard the United States Ukraine envoy, Keith Kellogg, say Europe would not be included in these talks. So at this stage, what are the European options?
Well, whether Europeans will be present in Riyadh or not is not important for the development of finding a peace solution. So, of course, anyone could meet with anyone to stop the killing. This is first and foremost the most important thing. And let me correct the guest from Russia. Europeans don't tell Ukraine what to do or to keep fighting. This is a decision of a sovereign state. And we have seen already in the answer that people from Russia question the sovereignty of Ukraine and everything that it comes with. Coming back to your question about what Europeans do right now, they learned over the weekend at the Munich Security Conference that the Trump administration has a different understanding of the state of NATO. This is a collective security system that is based on shared values. And what we heard from Vice President Vance is that he believes that we do not share these values anymore. So the whole question about whether Ukraine should join NATO or not becomes irrelevant if the guarantee of Article 5 that an attack on one of us is an attack on all of us does not apply to Ukraine, and it doesn't apply to Europeans, because what we also heard is that no matter what the peace result will be, American boots on the ground are excluded. It's up to the Europeans to pay for what is happening after that agreement, no matter who recognizes it. But the situation is totally different from what everyone took for granted in the previous administration.
Michael Maloof, these, of course, are very early days. As Dmitry Babich told us, these talks that are taking place right now are possibly negotiations about negotiations. But we did have one other major development. We had the British Prime Minister Keir Starmer saying that the UK would be willing to send its troops to Ukraine to guarantee Ukraine's security. Here is Starmer talking. Let's listen.
Unless and until we get a peace agreement, we must ensure Ukraine's in the strongest possible position. We don't know what's going to happen next. And we need to have realistic and credible answers to how any ceasefire, how any peace agreement will be lasting, just and enduring, because the last thing I want to see is a pause in the fighting that simply gives Putin the chance to come again.
So, Michael, how significant is this announcement by Keir Starmer that the UK is willing to send troops to Ukraine?
Well, I think it's a recognition that the Europeans are not ready for peace. They seem to be, they still hold this animosity toward Russia. It's as though they want to continue a war, whether passive or active. And as for Trump, he's taken an entirely different approach, and it's one in which Ukraine is an element of an overarching geopolitical, geostrategic view, and that's why this initial meeting with Russia is going to be more of a confidence building and a rebuilding of trust, which has all but left under the Biden administration, and even parts of the first Trump administration, frankly. So I think that this is trying to get relationships, geostrategic relationships, back on track, and of which Ukraine is just an element of that overarching strategic thinking. But the UK, for centuries, has headed out for Russia. And this is just one more case of animosity between the two countries. But it also shows that UK especially, and maybe some European countries, still want to maintain that containment of Russia, and if not to have regime change. And we have taken on a whole different approach now in geopolitical relationships.
Ulrich, Bruckner, what is your response to that the Europeans are not ready for peace? This could be an attempt yet again by the Europeans to contain Russia, perhaps institute some kind of regime change, as Michael Maloof told us. We did hear Keir Starmer tell us in that soundbite that the fighting should not stop.
Well, it sounds as if it has been the Europeans who invaded an innocent country and broke international law. If we now point fingers at Europeans as warmongers or whatever label you want to put on them. They have very important things to do. We live in times of climate change. We live in times of digitization. There are social rifts within the countries. We don't know how to finance the modernization of our infrastructure. So the last thing that people would like to see happening is a war in Europe. And the likeliness that this is happening if deterrence doesn't work anymore, because we have a different mindset in the current American administration, is higher than ever. So it's the exact opposite.
Dmitry Babich, if we look at what the United States is doing, I mean, it's also turned up the pressure pretty significantly on Moscow, and it says that if there is no progress on these peace talks to try and get peace with Ukraine, then, in fact, this was Vice President Vance who said this, he's threatened more sanctions against Russia and even military action. And the Special Envoy, Keith Kellogg, he also called for the U.S. to implement more sanctions on Russia's, what's known as the Shadow Fleet, to secure a peace deal. This Shadow Fleet is a reference to those tankers, oil tankers, that are used by Russia to avoid sanctions. So how does the Kremlin see those kinds of threats?
We have had so much pressure on us for the last, I would say, 30, 35 years since the collapse of the Soviet Union. It was continuous pressure. Believe me, I was a young journalist when perestroika happened, and there was just a hiatus of about 2 years when Western press was more or less not positive but neutral about Russia. Later on, it was constant pressure, sanctions, insults. So the good consequence of all of that is that we are insensitive to it. You know, we are trying to ensure our own security. It's a life and death matter for us, so we will not give up. And as for the sanctions against Russian tanker fleet, that looks like Mr. Trump is just trying to get some money, because who supplies oil now to the world? The United States. You know, they have unpacked their natural gas resources, their oil resources. So this is just a matter of unfair competition. And this whole peace initiative from Trump, we understand that this is mercantilist, you know. But there were cases in human history when people with some very pragmatic aspirations achieved something much better than people with very lofty rhetoric.
Yeah.
And here I would like to respond to Ulrich. You know, basically, the war did not start in 2022. The war started when President Yanukovych was toppled by the coup in 2014, which was openly supported by European countries. You know, Mr. Yanukovych got guarantees from the foreign ministers of Germany, France, and Poland that the opposition would not use any more violence on the 21st of February 2014. And that promise was breached immediately. And this was the beginning of the war, not 2022, when the war escalated to tragic proportions.
Right. Oleksii, you know, we hear Keir Starmer, the British Prime Minister, there talking about the war must go on, that the fighting must not stop. But can you give us a sense of the mood in Ukraine itself? I mean, these are Ukrainians who've lost their lives in this conflict. What is the feeling in the country, you know, about peace, about an agreement?
I would say it's not about continuation of the war. It's not about it's about not surrendering Ukraine. This is like a totally different narrative. And like once speaking about the peace, it's not about the equality to surrender. Like we will be continue fighting on, and we are really happy to hear that our allies are backing up us, same as like Europe, Britain, Japan, like more other countries. Even today we heard that China, for the first time, like really from our president, willing to help us with these peace negotiations and like sending a really interesting initiative.
Yeah.
And our Minister of Foreign Affairs, the Foreign Minister of Foreign Affairs of China, on in the Munich Security Conference. So we see the efforts of the whole of the world trying to help to stop this war, start to stop this invasion. Let me put it that way. And when one saying about breachment of some promises or some guarantees, like I would recall the Budapest Memorandum is when Ukraine surrendered its nuclear weapon on the guarantees and assurances of a territorial integrity and sovereignty, and Russia breached this big agreement. So like You know, like I really like when President Zelensky told to President Trump that Putin afraid Mr. Trump, and this is why he is agreeing on everything. He is trying to reestablish bilateral connection and promising that he will behave. But like this is just because Putin afraid of Trump and his efforts of stopping the shadow fleet, ruining further Russian economy, helping Ukraine to become its independent and sovereign again.
Yeah, Oleksii, let me ask you this. What are Ukraine's bottom line demands when it comes to any kind of peace settlement? You know, we've already heard the United States Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, say that a return to Ukraine's pre-2014 borders is unrealistic. Ukraine, we know from President Zelensky, wants a legally enforceable peace settlement. He wants security guarantees, a just peace, as he calls it. How do you see it work?
You know, like we heard a lot of statements from far left to far right, all of the possible agreements and like all of the possible statements at the Munich Security Conference. But like the reality is, yes, Russia occupied Crimea and several regions of Ukraine yet. But like, let us see for this superpower that for like almost 6 months or even more, like they're not been able to kick our army out of their territory from Kursk. And like this is a fear of President Putin to have a peace negotiation or like any kind of negotiation with Trump and with Ukrainian bargaining the return of Russian land. So like it's not as simple as it seems. And yet we will never ever approve this occupation and never give up our territories, including the cities where I have born and lived all of my life. And this will continue. We'll continue to fight for it, either military way or diplomatically with the strongest security guarantees, entering the European Union and joining the NATO.
Michael Maloof, you know, that threat that was made by Vice President Vance on the possibility of U.S. military attacks against Russia, that was made during an interview he had with the Wall Street Journal. That was an exclusive interview that the newspaper had with him. I mean, do you see any scenario, given the climate in the United States right now, where we could see United States troops deployed in Ukraine?
Not on a combat basis, but I think, Vance also challenged the accuracy of that Wall Street Journal report as misquoting him in many respects. If there was ever to be any presence of U.S. troops, and I tend to doubt that, it would be for administrative reasons, but I really don't see that. Also, what's missing in all of this is the fact that over the course of the years, not only did you have the Maidan coup in 2014, but you also have had over the course of years a violation of agreements, about a half a dozen agreements between the East and the West on indivisibility, that there will be no arming of the West at the expense of the East. And with the expansion of NATO, and that is the key here, that this has happened, and it has happened on the watch of mostly the Democrats, actually, under Obama and Biden, once under Trump with Montenegro. But for the most part, this NATO expansion over time has violated agreements, has violated understandings between presidents, heads of state, and Russia feels that its territory and its being is threatened with establishing Ukraine as a NATO partner, and the same with Georgia. And we saw very active efforts to try and bring Georgia and Ukraine under NATO, and that was spurned finally, ultimately. But this is an effort to contain Russia, and this attitude has not diminished on the part of the Europeans.
All right, Ulrich, what is your view on that? Is the expansion of NATO, possibly to include Ukraine, at the root of the conflict that we're seeing right now?
There is no such thing like an expansion of NATO, because sovereign states choose freely what their modernization strategy is and whether a collective security architecture is in their best interest. That's the nature of sovereign states. decide if they want to be EU members or NATO members. And apparently it was no problem to see a neutral country like Sweden or Finland joining NATO without enforcing an existential threat to Russia. This is all storytelling, and it tells the story based on the general assumption that there are powers and there are condition takers. And if the territory, Central and Eastern Europe, is considered to be an influential zone, then all of this makes sense. If you see them as sovereign states, it doesn't. You can also read the book of Mary Sorotti, who looked into this myth of promises given from the West to Russia. It doesn't exist. So she concludes that it is something that was missing to reach out and find a stable post-Cold War situation that makes both sides happy with their expected security guarantees. So both sides do have this, but this storytelling of there have been promises given to the other side and they have been broken is as much a myth as this idea of a CIA staged coup. Otherwise, the people in Ukraine wouldn't defend their territory as they currently do.
Dmitry, looking at the broader relationship between the United States and Russia, the Russian President Vladimir Putin, he's invited President Trump to visit Russia, and there's some indication that Moscow wants Trump to be in Russia to attend the 80th anniversary celebrations of the victory over Nazi Germany, and that is going to be taking place in May, on the 9th of May. What do you see happening, if Trump does indeed travel to Russia?
I think that just reminds us of the huge opportunity which we all had in the early 90s to redefine the relationship between the West and Russia, between the United States and the European Union and Russia. And that opportunity was missed. So I remember in 1995 when Bill Clinton, Jacques Chirac, the German leader, Helmut Kohl, they were all in Moscow. They all celebrated the Victory Day. And unfortunately, the situation is much worse now. I think this day, the Victory Day should unite us, all of us, including the Germans. In that sense, my narrative, whatever Ulrich says about it, will be based on facts. Please remember, before the Maidan coup, the relations between Russia and Ukraine were normal. We cooperated. There was trade. There was that famous Solka Cup in Ukraine in which we participated. Later, this all became impossible when the new government came to power in Ukraine.
Okay, no doubt we will have lots to talk about in the coming weeks, but we have to leave it there. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That is it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington.